we're going to do is we're going to be adding functionality to our web page. So as you can see on the screen, I have a little bit of HTML code, and this time in the body tag, I have a button and the text is click me. So you can see it over here in the output on the right hand side. And then I also have a heading which says some random text, and I've given it an ID of heading 2. Now if you've seen the DOM, that is the document object model video in this playlist, you have an idea of how JavaScript manipulates the HTML objects, that is the document objects on the web page on the client side. So if you don't know what is document object model, I would recommend that you check that video. And essentially what JavaScript does is it adds a little bit of functionality on the client side to make the website more interactive, right? So using HTML and CSS, you can make a very static website. However, it will not perform any activities on the client side. So it has to be either backed with some backend language, that is any server-side scripting language like ASP or PHP, or you can also perform some functionalities using JavaScript on the client side, on the front end. So that's where, for example, you want to perform certain validations. So you have some text box and you want only numbers to go into it, or you don't want them blank, or you want to perform some actions on some click events, then you can use JavaScript. So when you're talking about HTML document which is loaded onto the browser, there are a lot of events that are happening. So event is basically an activity. Let's say I am clicking this button. So this is an event. Okay. So you can have many standard events. So we have a lot of standard events in HTML, like click events, scrolling events. Let's say you are changing focus from one text box to another text box. You're dragging some text, you're selecting something, you're double clicking on it, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of standard events. I'll try to list some of them in the video description if you want. But then what happens is these events can be mapped into the JavaScript, and we can target these particular events to perform certain actions. So in very basic, let's say you want to perform something when you click this button. So right now if I'm trying to click it, nothing is happening. And also, by the way, I've zoomed in on the Chrome browser. The actual size is something like this, but then it will be very small in the video, right? So that's why I've just zoomed in a little bit. But yeah, what we want to do is when we click on this, we want to show an alert message. So we need to actually map this event, right? So whenever we are clicking on this, something in the code, that is something in the JavaScript, has to register this, and we have to perform some action onto it, right? So this is where the DOM manipulations come into picture. So let's go ahead and add some functionality on this button. So in the HTML tag, we have this button, and as I mentioned, we have some standard events which are related to HTML tags. So one of them is on click. So if I just type on, and you can see that there are n number of events actually. These are all events that are showing up, and we want the on click one. So I'm just going to click on it, and there you go, the code is already generated for us. So the way we map these events to JavaScript is by using functions. Now we've already seen what are functions, right? Functions are a set of statements that perform a particular task, and you can call them, right? So you define a function and then you call it. So let's first actually define a function. So I'm going to say function button click. Okay. So this is the name of the function, opening and closing round brackets, and the body. So this is something that I'm doing in the script tag. Okay. So I'm just defining a function, and I'm going to say alert, which shows a pop-up message. You'll see that in a minute. We've actually used it in the previous videos also. So this alert is a predefined method or function, and in the double quotes, I'm just going to say button clicked. Okay. I'm just going to save this, and you can see that I'm not really calling this anywhere as of now. So if I just call this over here, you can see immediately in the output we are getting button click, but we don't want this, right? We are not wanting to call it immediately. We want to call this method when the button is actually clicked. So again, coming back to this event of the button tag. So what we do is we just write the function name over here. So we say button click and opening and closing round brackets of the function. So now what we just did is we registered this on click event to call this JavaScript function, and we've defined our function over here. So whenever I try to click on this, so if I click now, you can see button clicked. So we're getting that message. So what we just did in a very simple way is we added functionality to this button, right? We made it do something when we wanted it to do it. So essentially this is something that we are going to be doing a lot in the further videos, wherein we are going to be mapping certain events to certain functions, and we are going to be performing certain activities what we want. Let's say you want to perform validations. Let's say you want to perform animations. You want to perform, or you want to change the CSS styling of some text. You want to change the text, and so on and so forth. So this was just the mapping of events. Now just let's talk about the get element by ID method. Now let's say you want to perform something else on this button click. You don't want to show this alert, but what you want to do is you want to change this text and type in something else, right? Let's say you want to type in Telesco learnings, but this should happen only on this click. So the button click event is going to be the same. However, the function code, that is the statements inside the function, has to be different, right? So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to say document. Now document is a predefined object. If you've seen the document object model, you know that the document object represents the entire document that is loaded into the browser. That is the HTML document. And using this document object, we can access certain predefined methods and functions. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document dot, I'm going to say get element by ID. So what this method does is, you can actually read the definition also, returns a reference to the first object with the specified value of the ID or the name attribute. So I'm just going to hit enter and opening and closing round brackets, and inside this round brackets, what I'm going to pass is I'm going to pass the ID of this h2 tag. So this h2 tag has this unique ID heading 2. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this and going to paste it over here. So essentially what we're doing is we are trying to fetch that element on the web page whose ID is heading 2. So using the document object, we are trying to identify which tag or which element has this heading 2 ID. So we know that h2 tag has this, right? Now when I access this, so basically we are getting a reference, right? So you can see by the definition also returns the reference of the element which has this particular ID or name. Right now it is ID. Now once I get the reference of this h2 tag, because h2 tag is represented as an object in the document object model, I can say dot and then I can say inner HTML. So inner HTML is a property of the h2 DOM object, because this h2 tag is represented as an object, right? So JavaScript sees it as an object. So objects has properties. That's what we saw in the objects video. So inner HTML is a predefined property of this h2 tag, of this basically element that we just found out. And this inner HTML property is actually the text which the tag holds. Okay, so if I say equal to, and if I change the text to Telesco learnings, so what we did over here is we accessed this tag using the ID and we changed its property, that is inner HTML, that is the text inside the tag, to Telesco learnings. However, as of now you cannot see it because this will only happen on the button click. So let's try to change it, and there you go. You can see as I clicked it, the text got changed to Telesco learnings. So this was the document.getElementById. You can perform a lot of things with the getElementById. You can actually get this and store it in another variable. So I can say var x is equal to, and what I'm doing is I'm storing the inner HTML, which is some random text, in our own very own variable. So this is a new variable. If I say str, so this is a string variable which will store string value, because .inner HTML is going to return a string, and it is going to return some random text which will be stored in our str. So if you want, I can also show it to you in this alert. So if I say str over here, and if I click on this button, because this function is always going to be called only when we click this button, right? Because that's where it is called over here. This is how the mapping is done. So if I click on this, you can see in the alert it says some random text. So this text was accessed over here using the document.getElementById .inner HTML property, and it was stored in our str variable, and we just popped it up in the alert message. So this is how you can do multiple things by accessing different tags on the HTML using the getElementById. So this is just one way of accessing it. There are many other ways in which we can access elements. We will be taking input from user from a text box, and then we'll show a message, or you can do anything with that once we take it. So let's first start off with creating a text box. As you can see, I have a blank HTML document and you can see nothing in the output as of now. So let's add some HTML elements first. So first thing I'm going to add is an input text. So the way we go about is you just type in input, and I will say ID is equal to text1. I will give a placeholder value. So what this is, I'll tell you. So I'm going to say enter anything. So there you go. You can see in the output over here. Now this is a very enlarged version because I have zoomed in. If I say Ctrl 0, you can see it becomes very small, but then it won't be visible. So that's why I just zoomed in a little bit. Okay, so we have our first text box. This is how you create a text box in HTML. I hope you have a basic idea about this. This is a HTML5 text box. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a break, br tag, and then I'm going to create a button. I'm going to give it an ID of btn1. Close the button, and here I'm going to say click me. Okay, so the idea here is we enter something in the text box. When we click on this click me button, we will get an alert box, we will get a pop-up message, we will print this text into that alert message. Okay, so this is what we are going to do in this video. So now as of now we don't have any functionality on this button. So just what we did in the previous video, we are going to be doing the same thing, just that we are going to be using this text box value instead of that h2 tag that we used in the previous video. So again, when we click on this button, we want something to happen, and that something can be done using functions. So again, on click event of the button, and on click we want something to happen. So I'm going to say fn1. So this is the name of the function. We are giving a function call over here on click. So you have to create this function. As of now we haven't yet created it, so let's do that. So here I'm going to say function fn1. So this is the name of our function fn1, and we are doing this inside the script tag. So now what we'll do is we'll create a variable where str is equal to, we're going to be using the document object. So document is a by default object provided by JavaScript which will access the entire document. I'm going to say dot get element by id. So this is something that we saw in the previous video also. What this method of document object does is, whatever id you pass in the opening and closing round brackets, so in this case it has to be text1. Okay, so this is our input text and we've given it an id of text1. So I'm going to pass that id over here. So this method will get reference to this input text, and then we can get its value by using dot value property. Okay, so this dot value is a property of text boxes wherein we can take the value inside the text box, and what we're doing here is we are storing it in our str variable. Now we're just storing it over here. We have to also pop up the alert box. So we're going to call the method alert. Inside the alert I'm going to say value inside the text box is colon, and I'm just going to append the str string variable that we created over here. So let's enter something. I'm going to say Tanmay. By the way, I forgot to mention what this placeholder is. This placeholder basically is shown when nothing is entered. Okay, so you might have seen this in many text boxes on websites wherein until and unless you type anything there is some indication. So basically this is given to let you know what you have to type in. So sometimes it is username or password depending upon what that text box or that field is going to do. So I'm going to say username, and then a person will know, okay, you have to type in username over here. So this acts as a placeholder itself, and this is one of the attribute you can say of this input type text. Okay, so there is no value currently inside this. You can see we are at this cursor, so it's blank. It's just an indication that what we have to type in. Okay, so I'm just going to say Tanmay, and if I click on this button, there you go, you can see value inside the text box is Tanmay. So this means that our functionality is pretty much done over here. What we did is we took input from user in a text box and we showed it. Now let's say you want to perform some activity based on what user inputs. So this is something that now you can do. So what I would ask you guys to do as a homework or just a added practice is create two text boxes, give them two different IDs, give one placeholder as username and the next one as password. And when you're creating a password input text, so let me just show it to you as well. Let's say if I create text2, there is a type attribute associated with input types, and when I say type equal to password, and in this I'm gonna say password. So if I type anything, you can see that I get these dots, right? So this is what this input type does. So I'm specifying that this input text box is only gonna take password, so directly do not show what you type in. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is just create two text boxes and take value from the user, and on the button click what you have to do is, if username and password matches, you have to show a message in the alert box that username and password is same, and if it doesn't, you have to say it does not match. So another hint, that is you have to use if else in your function. So let's see what these radio buttons are. So in the body I'm just first gonna add two radio buttons. So to do that I have to type in input and I have to say type is equal to radio. Okay, so as you can see on the screen we are getting a radio button. So radio buttons are used when you have to select one option out of multiple options. So let me just first type the code and you'll understand it. So after the type attribute of this input type, we have to give value. So I'm gonna write simple snippets over here, which is my channel name. After that I'm gonna close the input type, and to display the value I'm just gonna write simple snippets. So as you can see we are seeing an option of simple snippets which is unchecked. If you click on it, it gets checked, right? Similarly, I'm just gonna add one more input type which is again a type of radio. Here I'm gonna say Telesco learnings, and inside the value attribute I'm gonna say Telesco learnings again. Okay, so we have two channels, that is simple snippets and Telesco learnings. Between that I'm gonna give a BR tag, that is break tag, and lastly I'm just gonna add a button. I'm gonna say click me, and again give a break. Okay, so what we're gonna do is when we click on this button, what we want to know is whichever value is selected, we have to show it in the alert box. And if no value is selected, then we have to show some message wherein we will say that no value is selected or something like that. Okay, so this is something that we have to do in JavaScript. As of now, you can see nothing is happening. So let's see the JavaScript code. So before moving on to the JavaScript code, I just added one more attribute in the input type, that is this name attribute. So what we're doing is we're giving this name group1, so grp1, and the same name we are giving it to the next input also. So what this does is you can select only one of the two options over here, and this is done because of us giving the same group name. Okay, so if I would have given this another name, let's say this is group2, then in the output I can select both of them together, right? So now you can see both of them are selected. However, what we want is we can select only one channel name at a time. So that's why you have to give the same group over here, and then you can select only one out of the two. Okay, so this name can be anything, but if you give the same names to both the input types, so this is the name attribute, and you have to give the same value if you want to select only one of the n number of input types. So you can have multiple radio options also, but right now we are just going to be using two. So again, quickly giving them IDs also, we have to still give them IDs. So this is going to be RD1, that is radio button 1, and I'll give this as RD2. We also have to give ID to button, so button ID BTN1, and now we have to use its on click event. So I'm going to say on click and call a function named fn1. Let's say this is fn1. So we have to still create this fn1 in JavaScript, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so in the script tag, let's start to create this function 1 that we are calling on the on click button. So I'm going to say function fn1, that's the name of the function, right? In the opening and closing curly braces, that is the inside the body. What we are going to do is we're going to create two variables. I'm going to say where rd1 is equal to, I'm going to say document.getElementById. by id. So in order to access this input type by its id, we are going to be using the getElementById by id method. If you watch the previous two videos of this playlist, you must have got a good idea about what getElementById by id does. So in the id, I'm going to pass rd1 because we want to access the first input type. Similar to this, I'm going to create one more variable rd2, and here I'm going to pass the id of rd2, that is the second input type. So basically these two variables are now HTML elements. You can see if you hover on this, you can see in the tooltip it is showing HTML element, which means that this rd1 is an HTML object which is referencing this input tag. Okay, and this rd2 is referencing this input tag. This is the second radio button. So now we have to check which one is checked or unchecked, right? So depending upon what is checked or what is unchecked, we have to call the appropriate output, that is we have to show which one is checked or unchecked. So this can be done using the if else control statement. So I'm going to say if, what I'm going to say is rd1 dot checked equal to true. If true, then I'm going to say alert. Inside the alert box, I'm going to say the channel selected is colon plus, which will append the new string. I'm going to say rd1 dot value. So what I did over here is this checked is a property of this HTML element, which is an input type of radio button. So whenever a radio button is referenced in JavaScript as a variable, we have a property called checked, and whenever you check this check property always becomes true. So since this is an HTML element object, it will be associated with a number of properties as well as methods, right? So one of the property is checked, and it is always true whenever that particular element, that is that radio button, is checked or unchecked. So similarly, this was for rd1. I'm going to say else if, in the condition what I'm going to say is for rd2. So if rd1 is not checked, that is if rd1 is false, it is going to move ahead and check for else if, and it's going to check for rd2, and the same condition for rd2 also. If rd2 is checked, we want to print rd2.value. So what are these value attributes? So if you check the input types in the HTML, we have been given one value attribute also. So this is that value attribute exactly in the object version. So the value here is simple snippet, so that is what is going to be printed over here if simple snippet is checked, and if telescope earnings is checked, that is what is going to be printed over here. And if both of them are unchecked, in the else we can say, in the alert message we can say no channel selected. So if you see, I have not given any curly braces for if, else and else if control statement blocks, because if there is only one line of code inside if or else if or else, you don't have to compulsorily give the curly braces of each of the blocks. If you have multiple lines, then you have to give curly braces, okay? So just to keep the code short, I have not given anything. Okay, so this is the complete fn1 function which we are calling on the button on click. So let's try to check this out. Right now nothing is selected. Let's click the button. There you go, you can see no channel selected, which means that else part is executing. Let's select simple snippets and click the button. And there you go, now you can see the channel selected is simple snippets. Let's select telescope earnings. And there you go, the channel selected is telescope earnings. So this means that our function is working perfectly fine. If you want, you can change the value inside this. I'll say SS for simple snippets. And now if I select simple snippets and click on the button, there you go, you can see the channel selected is SS. Which means that this value property of this RD1 object is mapped to the value attribute of this input radio button, right? So let's first actually start off with the HTML coding of that drop-down box, and then we'll move to the JavaScript. So in HTML, in order to create that drop-down box, you type in select and close the select box. So immediately you can see in the output, you get something like this. Right now we don't have anything as options inside it, so we have to create that. And this is a very zoomed in version. So if I zoom out, you can see it becomes very small, so it won't be visible. So that's why I'm zooming in. So inside this select tag, we have to add certain options. That is, we have to add the values, right? So to do that, we say option and the text inside the option. So I'm going to say simple snippets. So immediately you can see the first one we've got. I'm just going to add 3 more. So I'm going to say telescope earnings, and one more I'm going to say mkbhd. Okay, so if I click on this, you can see we have 3 options. Lastly, we want a button. So what we'll do is on the button click, we will alert or we will show the message which of the option is selected. So if telescope earnings is selected, in the alert box we will get telescope earnings. Okay, so this is the functionality that we are going to be doing. So for that we also need a button. So let's add that. I'm going to say click me. And just like what we've been doing in the previous couple of videos, I'm going to be using the onClick event, and I'm going to call a function fn1, which we still have to define in the JavaScript. But we also have to give ID to the select box. So I'm going to say ID is equal to select box, because we're going to be using the getElementById method of the document object to access this select box, right? Now one more thing that we have to do is we have to add values to these options. So right now what we've added is just the text that is being shown, but what we have to do is we also have to add the actual value which we want to access or show in the alert box. So that is done by using the value attribute, and then I'm going to say the same value, so just copy pasting this. Similarly, your value would be telescope earnings, so just copy pasting this, and lastly the value would be mkbhd. Okay, I'll just take the button on the new line using a br tag. And right now you can see on the click nothing is happening because we still have to define this fn1 function. So let's move on to the JavaScript and let's define this. So I'm going to say function fn1, and what I'll do is I'll say var select. I'm going to create a variable which would be referencing this select HTML element, right? So in order to do that, we have to use the document.getElementById method. Inside this, you have to pass the ID of this select box. So this is something that we've been doing in the previous couple of videos. By now you should be very clear with this. And now that our select variable is actually an HTML element, you can see if you hover on it, it's an HTML element object. So what we want to do is we want to get the value of whichever option is selected, right? So in the alert method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select, which is our variable which is pointing to this HTML element. I'm going to say dot, and there is a property of this select box which is known as options. So this property is basically a collection of all the options that are there in the select box. So that's why it's sort of like an array, because we have multiple values, right? So it's an array. Now we have to pass the index of that value which is selected. So obviously dynamically it is going to change, right? So sometimes I'll select telescope learning, sometimes I'll select simple snippets, and depending upon that, the value should change. So I cannot give a static value, I cannot give 0, or I cannot give index value of 1 or something like that, right? So if I do that, and if I say dot value, and if I click on this, there you go, you can see I'm getting telescope learnings, but this is not what is selected. You can see simple snippets is selected. So 0th value is selected, but we are getting the position of 1. So if I make this 0, and if I hit click me, I'll get simple snippets, because index always starts from 0. But this is not something that we want, because we want this to be changed dynamically depending upon what we select. So here what we can do is, inside this square brackets I can say select, which is again the same variable, and I can say dot selected index. So this is another property of this object which gives us which index is selected. So now if I click on the button, I'm getting simple snippets. If I change this to telescope learnings, I'll get telescope learnings in the message, and if I change it to mkbhd, I'll get mkbhd. So this is how you can add dynamic functionality to your existing code. You don't have to hard code the values. And this dot value, I hope you know, is exactly this value that we are giving over here. So if I change this to ss, even though in the option it is simple snippets, that's just the text that is being shown, but the actual value is ss. So if I click on this, you can see I'm getting ss over here. So on your website, you have multiple elements. So let's say you have a proper complete website. So that won't be looking something like this, right? You'll have a lot of divisions, you'll have a lot of sections, paragraphs, and many other HTML tags, right? So what happens is, what if you want to perform manipulations on a lot of HTML elements at the same time? So this is where you cannot use getElementById, because when you're assigning IDs on the HTML document to different tags, they have to be unique. So you cannot have PID1 or P1 again over here. So this is not valid in HTML. And the reason is because this ID has to be unique to all the HTML elements on the HTML document. Okay. So now our task is to perform manipulations on all these paragraphs at the same time. So we cannot use getElementById. So this is where the getElementByTagName method comes into picture, and this is another way in which you can manipulate the HTML tags on the website. So we're going to be taking a look at what this is. Okay, so let me just tell you what exactly we are doing. So we have 5 different paragraphs. You can see this is paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. In the output also you can see it. In the output it is very much zoomed in, because otherwise it won't be visible on the screen. So if I zoom out, this is how it should be looking. But since for the video purpose, I've just zoomed in a little bit. And then we also have a button, and on its click we are calling a method change styling. Okay, so right now it's not working because we don't have anything of change styling name. So we need to create that function. And what we are going to do is, when we click on this button, we are going to be changing the CSS attributes of all these paragraphs. Now of course JavaScript can be used to change the CSS also. We can use JavaScript to perform validations. You can use JavaScript to take input from the user. You can use JavaScript to perform animations also. So here what we're going to be doing is, we're going to be changing the CSS styling. So let's quickly go ahead and create this function. So I'm just going to copy paste this change styling and paste it over here. Now inside this we have to use the getElementByTagName method, right? Because we want to change styling of all these paragraphs, and we don't want to individually access them and do that. You can also do that. You can create 5 different variables and you can assign 5 different IDs, but that becomes a little more tedious, right? So in a real world scenario, when you have a lot of HTML elements, accessing them individually will take a lot of time, right? So now what we're going to do is, we're going to be saying var para is equal to, I'm going to use the document object, because that method getElementByTagName comes under the document object only. I'm going to say document dot getElementByTagName. So this is that method. In the opening and closing brackets, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pass the name of the tag in the double quotes. Now the name of the tag is this, what we have in the angular brackets. So name of the tag is p tag, which is the paragraph tag in HTML. So I'm going to pass p, and this is how you actually access all the paragraphs. Now let's say you had 5 different divisions. So you had div tags. So if you have 5 different div tags, you have to pass div over here. You have to say div. Okay. Similarly, if you have anchor tags, anchor is the link that you provide. You know, you have a href and then you have some anchor, and this is anchor tag. So this href is the link to which you want to point it out, and you can see that anchor tag is created over here. If you click on it right now, we will not get anything because it's pointing to itself. this hash represents that. Anyways, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail right now. Let's first see what we have to do with the paragraphs. So when you pass a tag name, and when I'm saying P, I'm going to be accessing all the paragraphs on this body, regardless of what ID they have, regardless of what class they have, regardless of what attributes or already CSS styling they have. I can access all of them using just this one line of code. So what this method is doing is, it gives us a HTML collection of these HTML paragraph elements. So you can see in the tooltip also, HTML collection of HTML paragraph elements. So basically we are not getting one value, right? We are not getting one paragraph tag. We are not getting this. We are not getting this. We are getting a collection of all of these. In fact, collection of all of the paragraph tags on the website. So if you hover on this, you can see HTML collection of HTML paragraph elements. So basically what we are getting is an array. Now we've already discussed what is an array. Array is a collection of multiple variables or multiple values which can be accessed using the index, right? So similarly, we can access individual p tags using index. So let's perform some manipulations and let's see how that syntax goes. So to access the first paragraph, I'm going to say para of 0 because indexing starts from 0 for arrays. I'm going to say dot style. So style is a property because it's a collection of objects basically. It's not a simple variable because it is an HTML element, right? And HTML elements are represented as objects in JavaScript. So they have properties and methods along with it. And now we have basically a collection of objects in an array. Okay, so this array holds these individual HTML elements. And these HTML elements are represented as objects in JavaScript. So we have style. And then inside the style property, we have which style you want to perform. So this style attribute has multiple sub attributes, you can say, which means that in CSS also you can have font size, font weight, color, and so on and so forth. So they all come under style. So I'm going to say style dot font size. You can see over here, and I'm going to increase the font size to 24, let's say, or let's do it 25 for now. So what we did is we accessed the first paragraph. So para of 0 is accessing this paragraph. This is first paragraph, right? And we are changing its font size. So basically we are changing the CSS styling. So let's see if this works. Right now we are calling change styling function over here on click. So it should work. I'm going to click this. And there you go. You can see the size of the first para changed. So now let's try to manipulate paragraph 2 and add some different styling to that. So I'm just going to copy paste this, and over here I'm going to say paragraph 1. But now here what we'll do is we'll change the color. Okay, so I'm going to say color, and here I'm going to pass red. So let's see on click what happens. So there you go. First, the size of the first para changed and the color of the paragraph 2 also changed. So we are manipulating two paragraphs in these two lines. So for the third and fourth, I have already copied some new styles. So here what we're doing is we are increasing the font weight and we are making it bold. And for the fourth one, we are doing font style is equal to italic. Okay, so these are all predefined attributes, and in the color you can pass a hex code also. So if you just hit para 3 dot style and then you again hit a dot, you will see all the values. In fact, you know what I'm trying to say is if I say dot, you can see the multiple styles that you can do. You know, you can change different things, and all the IntelliSense is showing is the things that you can change over here. So, you know, you can change background color, bottom color, so on and so forth. A lot of things can be done. Right now, we are just seeing the basics. So let's see if this is working. So there you go. You know, first we increase the size, then we change the color, then we made the text bold. This is that font weight property, and then we made it italic. So again, italic property, and this we kept it unchanged. So now you must be wondering, okay, we accessed all the paragraphs using the get element by tag name, but ultimately we are individually changing each and everything, right? So what is the difference between get element by ID and get element by tag name? Because ultimately we are using array indexes to individually access each and every paragraph, right? So the basic difference is this get element by tag name can access one particular tag at a time, and when you're using get element by ID, you can access any tag which has that particular ID. So only one particular element can be accessed. Here you can see we are getting a collection of whatever tag you're passing. So you can be anchor tag, division tag, or anything, whatever you pass. And depending upon how many values or how many actual tags you have on the HTML body, all of them will be accessed at one single time. But when you're performing manipulations, you have to individually access them using the array indexes. So you cannot have something like this. So if you try to do this, nothing will happen. You can see because basically it is an array and it has to be accessed using indexes. So I have to give an index and only then it will work. So one benefit of using this array styled indexing or DOM manipulation is that you can use a for loop when you have multiple tags, So let's say you have 100 paragraphs. Okay. So in that case, if you want to perform some iterative changes, what you can do is you can use a for loop. So you can say for var I equals to 0, I less than para.length. So this length is an attribute of any array. We've seen that. So it changes dynamically depending upon how many number of paragraph tags you have on the body. So if you increase it on the fly, this will also change. And then you can say I plus plus. And in the for loop, you can perform para of I dot style dot font size equals to 22. Okay. So if I do this in one single line, you can see I have changed all the sizes of all the paragraphs. So imagine you having 100 paragraphs and just by using one for loop, you have changed all the styles. So this is possible because now we are using array styled indexing or array styled manipulations, because we get the index and then we can manipulate it using the for loop. And let's first understand what is the difference between get element by class name and get element by tag name. So if you've seen the previous video, what we had is we had 5 different paragraphs and we didn't have class in those paragraphs. So in this case, we have 3 paragraphs which have a class of myPara. So basically this class is an attribute of tags, of HTML tags. You can have class attribute to any HTML tag, be it a division, be it a anchor, be it a paragraph, be it a section, or so on and so forth. So what happens is we have 2 different ways in which we can uniquely identify particular elements. So we have IDs. So we have ID is equal to P1 and then we have class. So the difference between these two is when we use ID, we can use that unique ID only one time for one particular HTML element or HTML tag. Okay. But what you can do is, let's say you want to perform manipulations of multiple tags, So here you can see you have 5 paragraph tags, but I want to change style for the first one, the third one, and the last one. Okay. I don't want to change any styling for the second paragraph or fourth paragraph. So in that case, I can use this class attribute. And my goal over here is to change the styling for all these paragraph 1, 3 and 5 in the same way. So if I'm changing the font size of paragraph 1, I also want that same thing applied to paragraph 3 and same thing applied to paragraph 5. So I cannot use the same IDs over here because as I mentioned, ID has to be unique. So that's where the class attribute comes, and in CSS also the way we access these two things is different. I'm not gonna do the CSS styling over here because we are more interested in JavaScript. But when we move ahead in this series, we will also see some little bit of CSS code, and we'll see a different file which is .css file which will be linked, and we'll also see a separate external JavaScript file. But right now, just to keep things easy, we're going to be doing everything over here in JavaScript. So this is the basic difference between ID and class. And now let's see how it looks like in the JavaScript. So on the click, we have change styling method, just like what we had in the previous video. Right now, if you click, nothing is happening because we don't have any JavaScript. So let's create that function. So I'm going to say function change styling. Inside this, I'm going to say var element is equal to, I'm going to use the document object because the get element by class name is a method which is for the document only. So I'm going to say document.get element by class name, and inside this I'm going to pass the class name which we've given to these paragraphs. Okay, so what is happening over here is this get element by class name is returning a collection of HTML elements which has the class of myPara. So now you must be wondering, okay, then what is the difference between get element by tag name and get element by class name? So get element by tag name returns all the tags of a particular HTML element. So let me just show it to you. So if I say var tag is equal to get element by tag name, and inside this I need to pass the name of the tag. So here I'm passing P. So what is happening over here is I will be getting all the paragraphs of a particular type of HTML element. In this case, it is paragraph. So let's say you have one anchor tag. Okay, so I'm going to add an anchor tag ahref, and I'm just going to pass hash over here. I'm going to say this is anchor tag. Okay, so in the output, you can see now we've added an anchor tag, but now you can see that this is not a paragraph tag, right? So when I use this get element by tag name, I will get all the different paragraphs on the HTML document, but I will not get this anchor tag. Whereas when I use get element by class name, I will get all the HTML elements regardless of their type, whether it is a paragraph, whether it is a division, whether it is an anchor, whether it is a section. I will get all those elements having the same class. So if I apply this same class over here to the anchor tag also, I will get this anchor tag also in this elements array. Okay. Now again, it is going to be returning an array of HTML collection of all these HTML elements which have the same class, right? So this is the difference, and I hope you're getting it. When you want to access one particular type of tag and you have to access all of them on the HTML document, you use the get elements by tag name. But when you have to access different type of HTML tags, and that too limited ones, not all of them, you can give them classes and then you can access them using the get element by class name. Okay. So now let's actually go ahead and do certain manipulations. So here this manipulation is only going to apply to those having the class name as myPara. So myPara is applied to first paragraph, third paragraph, fifth paragraph, and we also have added an anchor tag. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to say element of 0. In this case, this is 0 means first paragraph. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll use the for loop for simplicity. I'm going to say for var x equals to 0, x less than element dot length, and I'm going to say x plus plus, and we're going to be applying one single styling. So I'm going to say element of x, because x is the iterating factor over here and it's not I. You can have any name. I'm going to say dot style dot color is equal to red. So let's see if this works. And there you go. You can see as soon as I click on the button, the first paragraph, the third paragraph, the fifth, as well as the anchor tag became red. So now you can see I can selectively target all the different type of HTML elements on the website using the class name, and it doesn't have to be of a one particular type, So if I use the tag name, I could have changed all the CSS styling, or I could have manipulated all the paragraphs, but not this anchor. And again, I have to access all of the paragraphs. So even though I just wanted to change the first one, third one, and fifth one, if I would have used get element by tag name, I would have got an array of all the paragraphs and not the selected ones. But since I'm using more selective targeting, I'm using get element by class name. So I am applying classes. I've applied the same class to all of these things which I want to access, and then I do the same process.